It was last fall. I was living alone in a small apartment on the third floor of an older building downtown. It was one of those places that had been renovated on the inside, but still had the original fixtures and doors from like the 1970s. I'd lived there for about 6 months by then, and never really had any issues. It was affordable, which I needed, and even though the building was pretty old, my unit was decent enough. This happened on a Wednesday night. I'd gotten home from work around 6, made myself dinner, and spent most of the evening just watching stuff on my laptop. It was a normal night. Around 10:30, I brushed my teeth, turned off all the lights, and went to bed. One thing I have to mention about the apartment is that for the last 2 months or so before this happened, the peephole in my front door had been broken. It was one of those standard peepholes, where you look through and can see who's outside, but the glass or lens or whatever was inside it had fallen out or gotten pushed through. I'd noticed it one day when I went to check who was at the door and realized I was just looking at a black hole. You couldn't see anything through it. I told my landlord about it, but he said he'd get to it eventually. And honestly, I just forgot about it after a while. I lived on the 3rd floor, and the building had a locked entrance downstairs, and so it felt secure enough. The hassle of following up with my landlord multiple times about something so minor just didn't seem worth it. I could still use the chain lock and deadbolt on my door, so I figured that was good enough. That being said, sometime later in the night, I woke up suddenly. My heart was beating quickly for some reason. The apartment was completely dark and quiet. I laid there for a second, trying to figure out what had woken me up. Then I heard it. 3 soft knocks on my front door. They were quiet, almost like someone was trying not to wake the neighbors. It was past 2 in the morning. I could feel the alarms going off in my head, but at the same time, I thought maybe it was a neighbor with an emergency or something. Maybe they had the wrong apartment. I got out of bed and walked to the door, not wanting to turn the lights on. I stood there and listened, but there was nothing. I tried to look through the peephole, forgetting for a second that it was broken. All I saw was that black, empty hole. I didn't say anything or open the door. After a minute of silence, I went back to bed. I tried to tell myself it was probably just someone who'd gotten confused about which apartment they were looking for, or maybe I'd imagined it. But as I laid there, I could tell something in me wasn't satisfied. Like my gut knew there was more to this. I kept opening my eyes and staring at my bedroom doorway, which looked out into the main room where the front door was. I could see the outline of the door from where I was lying, just barely. I probably stubbornly laid there, hoping to pass out eventually, for 20 minutes, before I heard something else. It was a very faint scratching sound, like metal on metal. It was coming from the direction of the front door. I sat up and tried to listen, but then it stopped. I was frozen, sitting up in my bed and not making a sound for a while. I was worried that if I got up and moved, then I wouldn't hear it again or wouldn't be able to tell what it was. The sound didn't come back though, and eventually I laid back down. I waited and listened for a long time, and don't even remember falling asleep. Didn't realize it until I woke up suddenly again, heart beating quickly just like before. It had to have been at least 2 hours since the knocking. I laid there in the dark, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was a very faint line of light coming from under my front door. The hallway lights in my building were motion activated and usually turned off after a minute or so, if no one was moving around. But the light was on. Someone was in the hallway outside my door. I laid there staring at that line of light, watching for shadows or movement, and then I saw it. The light changed slightly, like someone had moved in front of the door. I started to get out of bed, not really sure what I was going to do. Maybe look through the peephole again, even though I knew I wouldn't see anything. But just as I sat up, I heard the doorknob turn slightly. Not like someone was trying to force it open, but like they were testing it, checking if it was locked. I froze completely. The doorknob turned back and forth very slowly, very deliberately, Then it stopped. I didn't hear footsteps walking away, though. The light under the door was still on. Whoever it was still standing right there. I sat motionless and quiet for what felt like forever. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I thought about yelling through the door, asking who it was, but something stopped me. Some instinct that told me not to let them know I was awake. The hallway light eventually turned off, which meant either they'd left, or they were standing completely still. I waited in the darkness for maybe 5 minutes, before I very quietly got up and walked to the door. I pressed my ear against it and listened. Complete silence. I carefully bent down and looked at the gap under the door. I couldn't see the hallway light at all, which meant it was still off. I stood back up and tried to look through the peephole again, even though I knew it was useless. But this time, instead of seeing the black empty hole, I saw something else. There was a very faint bit of light coming through, not like hallway light, but like a phone screen or something. And then I realized what I was seeing. I was looking at someone's eye. They were looking back at me through the peephole from the other side. Someone was standing right against my door, looking into my apartment through the broken peephole. I jumped back from the door and immediately called 911. I was shaking as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. They told me to stay on the line. Thankfully, nothing else happened during the 12 or so minutes I waited for them to arrive and search the building. They took down a lengthy report of the whole night and everything I knew, which wasn't much, and they searched the hallways and stairwells, but found nothing. Over the next few days, I talked to my neighbors about that night. The guy across from me said when he got home around midnight, he saw someone sitting in the stairwell on our floor. He just assumed it was another tenant. That meant whoever it was had been in the building for hours before they came to my door, just sitting there in the stairwell waiting. And probably the most disturbing thing was realizing that with the peephole broken the way it was, someone could see inside my apartment if I had any lights on. How long had it been like that? 2 months? And I'd just been going about my normal routine every night, completely visible to anyone who wanted to stand out there and look, the landlord said. The entrance lock had been acting up for a while too, which made me wonder how many times someone had been able to just walk right into the building. How many nights had they been out there before this happened? The whole thing makes me sick to think about. I ended up breaking my lease early and moving back in with my parents for a few months until I could find a new place. I'm typing this out on a Thursday afternoon, but the actual night this happened was back in late September, when the weather was just starting to turn. I've gone back and forth on whether to post this, but I figured if even one person reads it and decides to trust their gut instead of ignoring it, then it's worth putting out there. I work remotely for a logistics company, and at the time I was renting a small house at the end of a gravel road, about 15 minutes outside of a rural town. The house sat on maybe half an acre, with thick tree lines on both sides and an open field behind it. My nearest neighbor was probably a quarter mile up the road and I almost never saw them. I picked the place because the rent was dirt cheap and I liked the quiet for working from home. The house itself was nothing special. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that connected to the living room. The back door had one of those old sliding locks that I always meant to replace, but never did. There was a motion sensor light mounted above the front porch that the landlord had installed at some point, though it would trigger for raccoons and deer so often that I started ignoring it completely. That's an important detail later, so on this particular night, I had worked late, which wasn't unusual. I wrapped up around 11 p.m. and made myself something to eat. I remember sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through my phone when the motion light outside clicked on. I glanced toward the front window out of habit but didn't get up. Like I said, it went off all the time. Animals, wind, whatever. It stayed on for its usual 30-second cycle and then shut off about 10 minutes later. It clicked on again. This time I did look up, but only briefly. I couldn't see much from where I was sitting, and I just assumed it was the same raccoon making its rounds. I went back to eating. Then maybe 5 minutes after that, I heard something that actually made me stop chewing. A single knock at the front door. Just one firm knock. I sat there staring at the door for probably 15 seconds before I even moved. Nobody came out to this house. I didn't get visitors. The delivery drivers would leave packages at the end of the gravel road half the time because they didn't want to drive down it. I got up slowly and walked toward the door. I put my ear close to the door and listened. Nothing. I turned on the porch light manually from the switch inside, then cracked the door open just enough to look out. There was nobody there, but sitting on the welcome mat right in front of the door was a cell phone. It was face up, screen on, showing the home screen of what looked like a pretty new phone. I stared down at it, then looked out past the porch into the yard. The motion light had shut off again, and it was dark beyond the porch glow. I couldn't see anyone. I don't know who would leave their phone. I picked it up and looked at it. It looked like a phone that had just been factory reset. I stepped back inside and closed the door. I set the phone on the counter and figured if someone came back looking for it, I'd hear them. I thought about walking out to the road to see if there was a car pulled over somewhere, but it was dark and cold, and I honestly didn't feel like putting on shoes and a jacket to walk a quarter-mile down gravel for a stranger who apparently couldn't even knock twice. That was my first mistake. Not going out. Not calling someone, or at least being more alarmed by it. I just rationalized it as some odd but explainable thing, and moved on with my night. About 20 minutes passed. I'd gone into my bedroom and was getting ready to sleep when the motion light clicked on again. This time I walked to the living room window and pulled the curtain aside just slightly, and I could see someone standing at the far edge of the porch light's reach, right where the gravel met the grass. They were just standing there. I couldn't make out any features because they were wearing dark clothing, and the light wasn't strong enough at that distance. My stomach dropped. I let the curtain fall back and stepped away from the window. I stood in the dark living room trying to think. Maybe they came back for the phone. That would make sense, right? But they weren't approaching the door. They were just standing out there. I waited a couple minutes and then looked again. They were gone. The motion light was still on, but nobody was in the yard that I could see. I checked the front door lock. Then I walked to the back of the house and checked the sliding lock on the back door. I looked out the small window on the back door, into the field behind the house, and saw nothing but darkness. I went back to the kitchen, and that's when I noticed the phone on the counter. The screen was on again, but this time it was showing something different. It was a picture of my house, taken from outside, at an angle that looked like it came from the tree line on the left side of the property, and the photo was time-stamped from 3 days ago. I felt my whole body go cold. I set the phone down and backed away from it like it was something dangerous. Someone had been watching this house days before tonight. They brought this phone to my door on purpose. I grabbed my own phone and called my friend Marcus, who lived in town, but he didn't pick up. Then, the back door rattled. Someone pulled on it from outside. The sliding lock caught and held, but I heard it strain against the frame. I backed into the hallway between the bedroom and the bathroom, watching the back door from a distance. Then I heard footsteps, moving along the outside of the house, from the back toward the side. I called 911 this time. I told them someone was trying to get into my house and gave the address. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and that a unit was being sent, but that it would take several minutes given my location. Several minutes. Out here, that could mean 15 to 20 minutes. The motion light triggered again. I crouched near the hallway and could see the glow flooding through the front curtains. I didn't go near the windows. I just sat there on the floor, with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to every sound. I heard what I think were footsteps on the front porch, Then nothing for a long time. The cops arrived about 18 minutes later. They searched the property and the tree line and found no one. But they did find shoe prints in the soft ground, near the back door, and along the left side of the house near the tree line, consistent with someone walking the perimeter. The phone I showed them was taken as evidence. I never heard anything back about it. I stayed at Marcus's place that night, after finally reaching him, and I didn't go back to the house alone for almost a week. When I did, nothing seemed disturbed. No signs of a break-in or anyone being there. The landlord said no one else had keys, and he hadn't been to the property. I still don't know who that person was, or what the phone was supposed to accomplish. The photo from 3 days prior is what haunts me the most, because it means they had been out there before that night, watching, and I had no idea. I think the phone was meant to keep me distracted, maybe get me to step outside looking for its owner, and I almost did. I was 22, and my older brother asked me to watch his apartment for a week, while he was on a work trip. He had a cat that needed feeding, and he didn't trust anyone else with a spare key. The place was a ground floor unit, in one of those small apartment complexes with maybe 20 units total arranged around a shared courtyard. Nothing fancy, but it was a decent neighborhood. I figured it would be easy. I didn't have much going on that week anyway, and his apartment had way better Wi-Fi than mine. I brought my laptop and basically planned to just hang out there and play games for a few days. My brother left on a Monday morning, and I settled in pretty quickly. The first weird thing happened that same afternoon. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I noticed my brother's tablet light up on the coffee table. He'd left it there, since he had his phone and laptop with him. A text notification popped up from someone named Linda, who I assumed was a neighbor. It said, "Hey, who's the guy hanging around outside your place?" I didn't know what to make of that. I got up and looked out the front window, but there was nobody out there, just the empty courtyard and a few parked cars. I thought maybe she saw a delivery driver or something and got confused. I didn't have her number to respond, and honestly, I didn't really care that much. I sat back down and kept scrolling. That evening, I ordered some food and watched TV in the living room. His apartment had this sliding glass door that led to a tiny patio area, facing the back of the complex. There was a small patch of grass and then a fence separating the property from the street behind it. Around 8 or 9, I heard this scraping sound from over by the door, like something brushing against the glass. I got up and walked over to the door, looking out through the glass. The patio was empty. There was a plastic chair out there, and one of those little round tables. I figured maybe the wind pushed the chair or something. It was a windy night. I checked that the door was locked and went back to watching TV. I stayed up pretty late. I was in a Discord call with some friends for a few hours just talking and playing games. By the time I got off, it was past midnight, and I was tired. I shut everything down and went to the bedroom. My brother's cat, this gray tabby named Oscar, was already curled up on the bed. The bedroom had a window that faced the parking lot on the side of the building. As I was getting ready for bed, I noticed the light kept flickering on. I looked out the window but didn't see anyone. It would go dark for a minute and then turn on again. I watched it happen maybe 4 or 5 times. I told myself it was probably a stray cat setting it off. Animals did that all the time, but something about it felt off. Like the light was staying on too long for it to just be an animal passing through. I closed the blinds and tried to ignore it. I got in bed, and Oscar was lying next to me purring. I was almost asleep when suddenly he stopped purring. I opened my eyes and saw him sitting up, staring at the window. I sat up and looked at the window. The blinds were closed, but there was a gap at the bottom. I could see the glass from where I was sitting, and I noticed something on it. There was condensation on the outside, like from someone's breath. And in the middle of it, clear as day, was a handprint, like someone had just pressed their palm against the glass. My whole body went cold. I was frozen for a second, just staring at it. Oscar jumped off the bed and ran out of the room. I was about to follow him when I heard something from the living room, the sliding door. The handle was rattling. I went to the bathroom because it was the only room with a lock and no windows. I shut the door and locked it and called 911. The whole time I could hear sounds from out in the apartment. I don't know if I was imagining it, but it sounded like someone walking around. The police got there maybe 10 minutes later. I stayed in the bathroom until I heard them announce themselves. When I came out, one of the officers was standing by the sliding door. It was open about an inch. I swear I locked it earlier. I checked it after the scraping sound, but the officer said the lock wasn't engaged when they got there. They found footprints in the dirt outside the bedroom window, and one of the neighbors told them she saw someone running through the courtyard toward the back fence when the sirens got close. She couldn't describe him, though. The officers took a report and told me there had been a few similar incidents in the complex over the past month. They said I should stay somewhere else for the night, and I didn't argue. I grabbed Oscar and my stuff and left, stayed at my own apartment, and told my brother what happened when he called the next day. He was freaked out, but there wasn't much either of us could do. He got new locks when he came back and installed a camera on the patio. I still think about that handprint on the window. How long was he standing there before Oscar noticed? And when I heard those footsteps in the apartment, while I was hiding in the bathroom, I think he was inside. He got the door open before I made it to the bathroom. And I think he left when he heard me on the phone with 911.